So, what is your background and what were the main reasons behind starting Luno?
So, I'm not one of the founders of Luno, but the four founders of Luno are all kind of tech and financial services, and they all met in Singapore. And their kind of goal with starting Luno was actually they were working with a bank in South Africa to kind of get that bank to build a platform to allow their customers to buy cryptocurrency. So that was the initial business idea was that. And then once that was built, they saw a huge opportunity in the retail space, as in like the kind of individual person in retail space. And then they pivoted to create a company that was essentially an exchange and a custodian wallet solution.
How did you set yourself apart from the competition? And what sets Luno apart from other exchanges?
So I think there's two things that set Luno apart from other exchanges. Number one is that we only offer Bitcoin and Ethereum. We're like super focused in the cryptocurrencies that we offer. And number two is that we are really relentlessly focused on widespread adoption. So we're not like looking for a pro trader kind of person, like some of the other big ones. We're not looking at like the expert user. We're looking to kind of really get people to try to buy and store cryptocurrency for the first time. And that gives us a lot bigger of a target market as well, because we're looking at, potentially like 6.999 billion people in the world. But also then helps to set us apart that we're focused on security and trust, that we want people to really feel comfortable with giving us their money and their time and their attention. And we focus really kind of heavily on what I would call like risk, compliance, and security in that framework.
Okay. How did you end up working with PayFast? Plus, subsequently, how did you end up facilitating one of the first cryptocurrency integrations into a payment processor in the world?
PayFast. How did we integrate with PayFast? Was this them from the Sandbox?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Sandbox. Yeah, fine. Got it. Sorry, man. I was just like, what the fuck? I had a blank moment there. So Luno were part of the first FCA regulatory sandbox, and that was essentially what facilitated us to work with payment service providers. And as part of that sandbox, we were part of the first cross-border crypto remittance transaction that kind of came out of the UK. And that was something that we were part of because we were trying to kind of prove to the regulators in the UK and beyond that there is a valid use case for cryptocurrency in a way that is safe and secure from a money laundering and counter-terrorist financing perspective.
How did you find that went? What were the results from that? And was there anything that came up which surprised you, or?
I think by and large we got what we thought we were going to get out of that. I think that what's come out of it in terms of how we now operate as a company is, there are certain challenges with identifying individuals in different parts of the globe. We work in 40 countries, and that's a challenge that we're continuously evolving with. But there's a huge industry that is kind of sprung up around identification and verification. Companies like Onfido, companies like Chainalysis and Elliptic that help you to understand who people are, where their crypto is coming from, and so on, that really help assist in that kind of regulatory journey.
Okay. What challenges did you face as a fledgling crypto company? How did you deal with the challenges of the volatile market? And
yeah. So I mean, every company is kind of wrestling with the depressed market from a price perspective. What's interesting for us and really what has helped us in this is that because we're not focused on people who are price sensitive, i.e. traders, day traders, and so on, we're a little bit insulated from the actual volatility of the market, in that we're playing in a space where we're going after the people who have perhaps not done this before, or who are relatively novices. Don't get me wrong, we have people on the exchange who are expert users and so on, but our focus is on converting people from the old school financial system into a new financial system. And another thing that works in our favor in terms of insulating us to some degree from that, from the volatility, is the fact that we operate in a number of other territories in the world where perhaps their own local currencies or their own local financial systems are a little bit volatile, and they may look to Bitcoin as a relatively more stable instrument. So again, we're kind of hedging ourselves in that respect. The other thing that we're seeing that the entire ecosystem is seeing is that volume-wise, although the price is depressed, volume is through the roof at an all-time high, and we're really benefiting from that as well.
Okay. Who are your most notable investors?
So we're invested in by the Balderson Group, amongst others. The Balderson Group, who are like a big European VC, they've invested in companies like Revolut, and we also have an investment from Naspers. Naspers are a Dutch-based company, Dutch/South African, and also a GDC, which is Global Digital Currency. They're like a VC that is invested in, I think, over 40 crypto or digital currency kind of startups around the world. So we have like a nice varied kind of set of investors. We have other investors as well, but those are kind of three of note, as it were.
Do these investors influence your development in any way at all beyond that, or?
I think they don't, like, in terms of like the negative connotation of investor influence. I would say that they don't, because they really buy into our value and like our values and our vision in terms of upgrading the world to a better financial system. But one of the things that having like a network of investors that are kind of well plugged into the fintech and kind of tech startup community is that we can really utilize like economies of scale in terms of their network effects, you know, and get access to resources that perhaps a smaller company would not. So for example, via Naspers, we have access to a great learning portal that allows us to kind of get our employees and staff members skilled up in a really wide variety of subjects that perhaps was something that a company of our size would initially not have thought to be a priority, but because of our investors, we're able to access that network.
Okay. How has Brexit affected your strategy?
I think that, well, I mean, Brexit has affected our strategy in as much that, you know, it's something that is kind of on the horizon. But again, we're not solely a UK-based company or solely a European-based company. We only launched in Europe, like officially as a market, in late 2017. So by that time, the reality of Brexit was already kind of well upon us. And our main markets, which are Africa, or our other markets, sorry, are Africa and Southeast Asia, are not kind of Brexit affected. So in that respect, we're in a good space, like versus say a completely UK-based exchange that would need to look at alternative European licensing, alternative entities, and so on and so forth. We're in a good space from that perspective.
Okay. What's your stance on forks, hard forks?
So I think that this is probably a question more for our technical guys, but I think generally like the Luno stance on forks is that if we see like a customer benefit to it, we will support it. But we don't just go and willy-nilly support every hard fork. We're super selective about what we support from a cryptocurrency perspective, and that reflects in our support for which fork we support as well.
Okay. How do you plan to develop the standard wallets as well as? Actually, no. There's a question before that.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. How are you marketing your custodial wallet?
So, you know, I talked about trust and security. Those are the kind of the two main pillars that we put on our wallet in terms of how we market that. We want people to be comfortable giving us, you know, control of their private keys, as it were, and trusting us with that. So that's something that we feel like there's a big credibility gap with a lot of people in the crypto space, and that's born out of events you see in the news and so on. But we're trying to like kind of cross that gap by being really, really kind of clear. We have on our YouTube channel a number of kind of instructional videos where we're trying to really explain what crypto is, what a wallet is, how it works, so they can kind of understand the difference between the current system and the system that we're taking them through.
Okay, and how do you see the market for this type of wallet developing?
I mean, I think that there'll always be a space for it. We are continuously looking at the product and looking at our kind of mix in terms of the product and seeing what other potential solutions there are. So there is a team in the business that is continuously looking at improving and diversifying both the wallet product as well as the exchange product and the API product. So that's pretty much all I can say at this time.
Okay, you can tell me if you have any plans to develop a standard wallet?
I think I can say that the wallet product is looked at regularly.
Okay, brilliant. What's your view of regulatory development?
So we're pro-regulation, but when I say pro-regulation, I say pro-right-sized regulation. And what I mean by right-sized regulation is regulation that is appropriate and also practical from the perspective of the information that is available to us. So yeah, I think that we interface regularly with regulators in the markets that we're involved in to either solicit their view on things or give our view on things, whether it's contributing to kind of consultation papers or even in markets that are perhaps a little bit less developed from a regulatory framework is having meetings with the regulators and suggesting what works in other markets. And again, we have that benefit of like a global breadth of view that we know what is happening in all of the markets, not just what's happening in the EU or what's happening in South Africa and so on.
Okay. So should we expect jurisdictions to tighten, or are we? Do you think we'll eventually kind of see them become more relaxed?
Well, I mean, I think that it's interesting because I think we'll see jurisdictions introducing regulation in the next kind of 12 to 18 months. I think that will bring cryptocurrency activity in line with other regulated financial activity. Whether that is considered to be tightening or loosening, I actually think that will help the players who are wanting to do things the right way, because it'll give them access to banking, access to payment service providers in a way that currently today is quite difficult because of the gray area regulation-wise. So I actually think that if you're like a good actor in the space, your life is going to be made a little bit easier by regulation. Whereas if you're potentially opposed to some aspect of regulation, your life is potentially going to get a lot more difficult.
Makes sense. What will the effects of more autonomous, decentralized, and privacy-enhancing services on regulations and on your business as a whole make an effect?
Well, I think that we're kind of the benefit we have is that we're part of that pie of the whole mix of kind of services and products that is affected by this kind of thing. So whether it's like GDPR or any other kind of privacy-based regulation, it's not just us as a cryptocurrency service provider that has to deal with it. So I think that we will be just as affected or just as unaffected as the rest of the mix in terms of wherever you store your data. Essentially, what we're doing is we're storing data. I think that on a kind of a separate note, one of the benefits we have, certainly with respect to legislation like the GDPR, is that there is a clause in that piece of regulation that allows us to keep information if there is a regulatory requirement from the perspective of law enforcement. And the vast majority of regulations around the world currently, I don't know how it's going to be currently, allow the storage of information for a certain number of years for law enforcement purposes, like transaction records and so on, because often you might get like an inquiry from law enforcement a year after a customer has left or whatever about some potentially criminal activity on that platform. Then you're able to fulfill that request. But we welcome all sensible regulation, and if regulation applies to us, we do our utmost to remain in compliance to it.
Okay. Lastly, what's your view of competition from banks and other more traditional fintech players?
In terms of cryptocurrency, you mean?
Yeah.
So I think that, first of all competition is great, right? Because it pushes people. But I think there's a guy called Ben Thompson, and he writes a blog called Stratechery that I read a lot, and he talks about like incentives. And it's like, if you look at like the dot-com boost and boom, there was and bust. There was businesses flourished because they didn't have the impediment of like a clash in a business model or a clash in like a reason for existing, like a new player did. So for example, when Barnes and Noble, for example, they had these retail stores, they had these employees, they had to maintain this kind of a structure, whereas Amazon was like Jeff Bezos and his wife's, or now ex-wife, because he's playing away, it seems. Cut that out. So Jeff Bezos in his garage just selling books, right? So there was like completely different incentive models. And I think in that respect, it will take a very brave bank to say that, hey, this traditional model that we're involved in doesn't have a future, and we're going to cannibalize ourselves by getting involved in crypto to the extent that they perhaps would need to. But from a resource perspective, obviously they have it. But the problem that like in all kind of historical markets where there's a new player and an old player is the incumbent lacks the hunger and the raison d'etre, as it were, to move into that market. Then you have the expertise issue, like where are you going to get people? Are bank people going to all of a sudden overnight become crypto experts? Probably not, because there's an industry that's been brewing for the better part of half a decade or even longer that has kind of accumulated understanding about the product, how to communicate it, and so on and so forth. So whilst we welcome it, I remain and this is my view, not Luno's view. I think that it will be very interesting to see if there is a bank that can become a crypto player. I think what is more likely to happen is that a bank buys a crypto player and kind of slots them in, and then you have that whole kind of M&A issue about culture and class of culture and how that fits. But that'll be interesting. Or you have a bank that collaborates very closely with a crypto player. You're seeing it in Japan right now, where some of the banks are picking up some of the exchanges and kind of integrating them. It's going to be an interesting journey.
Brilliant. Okay. Just lastly, are there any ICOs that you're personally shilling?
No, I think that we none of this is investment advice. Buy Bitcoin and Ethereum though.
Okay. Brilliant.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool.